5 seconds to go. Start. Now, while we have had both our domestic achievements and our domestic challenges and overcoming those domestic challenges, let us take a look at the state of the world. The last 5 years have also been very traumatic for the world. If you look in terms of five big shocks which have happened to the world, the COVID shock, which was not a shock, it was actually a long stress period. Then, what happened in Afghanistan with the withdrawal of the Americans, the impact of the Ukraine conflict, what it did to fuel, to food, to fertilizer prices, to inflation across the world. Now, the violence that we are seeing in the Middle East, whose future directions are anybody's guess, and the consequences of very sharp competition between the United States and China, and the implications that has for global supply chains, I think you can see very clearly this has been actually a very stressful period for the international economy. Now, politically, when we look at the world, the talk is increasingly of a multipolar world that people know. I mean, you do not have to be a political scientist or a diplomat today to understand that this is not a world of one power or two powers, that there are many more countries today in the fray, and that in many ways, while very welcome, also makes the world a more difficult place to navigate and to manage. At the same time, if one looks at the economic challenges of the world today, we are really looking at the consequences of what happens when trading rules are gamed, when competition has been unfair, and when actually the insecurities of the COVID era have caused many geographies, many regions, many big economies. Today, to talk in terms of strategic autonomy, in China they call it dual circulation, in America they call it foreign policy for the middle class, in Europe they call it strategic autonomy. But the fact is, today the world is heading towards greater insecurity and more protections, and the nature of how trading rules have been implemented over the last 2 to 3 decades actually have raised a lot of question marks about its effectiveness and the credibility of the regime. So, this, in a sense, is the scenario that we confront. And as the Minister of External Affairs, and obviously a large part of my attention, the economic side of my attention is very much on how we deal with the world economically, how we support our businesses, how we support our consumers, how we increase our employment. I think as a government, there is one thing on which we are very clear, and we are very clear on this, that while opening up to the world may be good, because nobody disputes the reality of globalization, we all accept that opening up to the world is good, but opening up to the world must happen only when there is a level playing field for our own industry at home. It cannot be at the cost of our industry, and I think that is one message which the Modi government has sent in a sustained manner over the last decade. With that context, if I can be a little presumptuous, allow me to talk about your role and responsibilities. Business today is something very much bigger than just business. All of you who are sitting here in many ways are actually leaders of modernity and progress. Because when you build the economy, when you build industry, as you expand services, as you propagate and spread technology, it is actually the ideas, the concepts, the projects that you do, the mindsets that you have created as a result. I think in many ways is actually the engine for India's progress. You are also builders of national strength, and I think that is the larger responsibility that must always be in your mind. One of our concerns in the post reform period has been that while we have concentrated a lot on growth, and understandably so, and I completely understand that at the end of the day business have to look at their bottom lines. The fact is, it is in our collective interest, I would argue in your interest, that we build deep strengths at home the way in which many other economies which all of you admire have done at their homes. So, I am not in any way diminishing the importance of international trade, and I am not oblivious to the global supply chains. But I think it is important, especially for big business in India, to help build Indian supply chains to support Indian vendors, because at the end of the day, no country will be strong if it does not have its own supply chain, if it does not have its basic requirements. Certainly, a large economy, a big nation like India, a nation with the kind of ambitions and future that we have, it is very, very important that we are Atmanirbhar. So, I would therefore urge you, as you look at really growing your own businesses, to also see what you can do really to help others in the business chain who, in the medium and long term, will actually be to your benefit if they are part of our society. The third, of course, is that you are all creators of employment. That employment will not grow in this country if business does not grow. I think it is a no brainer, but it is not always something which is so clearly recognized. But if we wish to grow employment, it is important that we give the support to the creators of employment. Only then employment will grow. In many ways, you are also the shapers of our image. You are shapers of our image, not just in a sort of broad branding way. I think business is a reference point for the rest of the world. Anybody who is coming into India wanting to invest will more likely go by what you say than go by what I say, because at the end of the day, business will listen to business, and the same works outside. If somebody outside actually has an image of India, wants to judge the prospects of India, wants to evaluate really how we are doing, where we are likely to be, I think the natural avenue for them to explore that is actually with the business community in India. So, for me, whether it is modernity and progress, whether it is building national strengths, whether it is creating employment, whether it is shaping our image, and whether as a driver of development, because at the end of the day, any project, any business, anything you do, the ripple consequences of that are enormous. Every employee has a family. Every increase in prosperity has some larger consequence not just for the lives of those people, larger consequences actually for the entire society. So, in many ways, if we are today really to increase, to deepen development, intensify development, make it much more inclusive, it is not just the need for more resources. That is obviously very critical, but the role that business plays, especially the role that business can play in, for example, aspirational districts in parts of India which, for whatever reason, perhaps had got left behind, I think is tremendous. And so there is actually a social agent aspect to your activities as well. So, if I were to sum it all up today, when nations assess each other, they do not do so anymore just in terms, a strong country is not necessarily a military strong country. It need not be even an economically, just an economically strong country. There is a concept of comprehensive national power. You put everything together, and it is that net assessment of how a nation or a society is, which is actually the value and the weight of that society in international relations. And a big part of that weightage is actually directly derived from your activities. Stop.